We also received a call earlier on that the NDA is requesting submissions by the 28th of February. And so we really hope that the conversation that's going to happen today is going to be a contribution. We will, of course, collate the information and consolidate the information that comes out of today. We will ensure that there is a submission on behalf of this group. If I can please just remind you all that there is a link to the recording. We will be sharing the outcome of today's meeting later on today. Yes, we think that it needs to happen very quickly. So if you can keep your videos off for now. If you're making a comment, may I please ask that you introduce yourself? So it's Ferial Domingo, and I'd like to say something. And so then we're capturing who said what. And you know, if you prefer to remain anonymous, you may of course do so. But I think in this instance, the voices are very, very important. So I'd like to now tell you who is going to be with us this morning. If Suzanne, on the next slide, you'll see the program is going to be run as follows. We're hoping to close up by 11:45, 12 o'clock at the latest. I've just completed the welcome. We'll be introducing others. And then from 10 past, we will have Mr. Siyabonga Shozi from the NDA. Then we have in our midst Dr. Frank Meintjes, who will facilitate throughout various pieces. And then we have got Mr. Rajesh Lachman, who will provide some historical context. Of course, he's been with the initial process of the couple of years ago, together with a couple of other members who you may find are also on the call this morning. And so then we will close out with Dr. Meintjes making some concluding remarks about the conversation, and then we will close it. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Mr. Siyabonga Shozi, the Head of Legal Services from the NDA. And Mr. Shozi, if you have your presentation, our technical support has given you opportunity to share, so if you can do that. And then I would like to hand over to you. We're very privileged to have you with us today, and we look forward to a lovely discussion. Thank you, Dr. Shozi.
Good morning, facilitator. Thank you very much. I'm trying to share. I'm getting an error message that the host has not given me rights to. Oh, it's coming up now.
There we go. Just try again for us. There we go.
Is it now visible?
No, we cannot see it yet.
Yeah, we can see it now.
There we go.
It's visible
Yes.
now, yes.
Thank you very much. You will bear with me. I haven't used Zoom in a very long time. We used to Teams. So if I struggle to get my way around the platform, you'll pardon me. As indicated, my name is Siyabonga Shozi. I'm the Senior Manager for Legal Services at the NDA. And I've been tasked with the responsibility.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Shozi, but do you mind putting your presentation in presentation format? You'll see at the, yes, if you can just click on that presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
I was I was indicating that I've been tasked with the responsibility of taking the webinar through the NDA Act as is, and then the proposed amendments to the NDA Act, so that we can then solicit inputs if there are any, and to bring our stakeholders up to speed as to where the process is and how is it going to unfold going forward. So for starters, the NDA Act that we are implementing currently was promulgated in 1998, and it came into operation in 2000 after being promulgated by the state president. The intention of the act can be ascertained from the long title of the act, and it reads as follows. It was first to establish the National Development Agency, which aims to promote and the appropriate and sustainable partnership between government and civil society in order to eradicate poverty and its causes, and to determine the objects and functions of the NDA, which is the agency, and to determine the manner in which it is governed and regulated. So the long title also provides the executive summary, which is, as I indicated, is to establish the NDA as the agency and the juristic person, which means that the agency in its own rights can be sued and can sue. The agency aims at promoting appropriate partnership between government and civil society, and this comes from Section 3 of the Act. And the Act determines the manner in which the agency is to be managed and governed, which comes from Section 5, 6, 7, and 8. And also, the Act goes further to regulate the financial affairs of the agency. This is one of the areas you will see when we deal with the bill. Apologies for that. You will see when we go through the amendment of the bill that this is one of the areas in which we are proposing amendments, because the NDA Act came into effect prior to the promulgation of the PFMA. Now the PFMA has been enacted, and it is the primary legislation when it comes to regulating financial affairs for all government agencies. So some of the sections that are regulating the financial affairs of the NDA has now become redundant because they are provided for under the PFMA, which then necessitate that they be repealed, and such matters will remain being regulated by the PFMA. Initially, this agency was under the political control of the Ministry of Finance, and this changed only in 2003 when the amendment of the NDA, the only amendment that was ever done of the NDA was processed, and it then moved to the Department of Social Development. If we now move to the legislative objectives of the NDA, which is its mandate, this is found in Section 3 of the Act, which provides as follows. It starts in Section 3(1)(a), which provides what we call the primary mandate of the NDA, which is to contribute towards the eradication of poverty and its causes. It does that by granting funds to civil society organizations in order to carry out projects and programs which is aimed at meeting the developmental needs of poor communities. And the second leg to the primary mandate is that of strengthening the institutional capacity of civil society organizations that are involved in providing services to poor communities. Then the Act also has what we call the secondary mandate, which is found in Section 3, subsection 2, which empowers the NDA to promote consultation, dialogues, and the sharing of developmental experience between civil society organizations and the relevant organs of the state, and to also promote debate on development policy, and to undertake research and publish the research outcomes, which will form the basis of a development policy. And then the duties of the agency are found in Section 4. The first thereof is that of acting as a conduit for funding from the government of the Republic, foreign governments, national and international donors. And such funding should be used for developmental work, which is carried out by the CSOs. One may pause a little bit here and indicate that even though this is a legislated power and duty of the NDA, this has never really been implemented in practice, because the very limited funds that are coming from other government departments and international organizations which are being conduit through the NDA to the CSO. Internally, we always discuss it, and we are not certain as to why this is. Is it because maybe there is no political will to do so, or there is any other reason for this part of the Act? Because our understanding is that the using for grant funding should be coming from these sources. But you have a situation whereby currently we are only able to do grant funding from what we get from the fiscus, which is not a lot. So that's one of the challenges that the organization is facing. The second duty is to develop, conduct, and coordinate policy relevant to our objectives, and also to contribute towards the building of capacity of the CSOs that are working in poor communities. We also mandated to create and maintain the database of all CSOs. And then there's then Section 4.2, which has got discretionary powers and duties. The discretionary power that we have, the first one is that we may grant money from the funds that we get from the fiscus. And we also empowered to develop criteria and procedures to determine how such funds will be granted to CSOs. Then the remaining sections are dealing with the governance governance arrangements, a composition of the board. The Act dictates that the board of the NDA must consist of 6 members who are representing government appointed by, sorry, that's a typo. It should read appointed by the minister in consultation with cabinet. And also, I see what, okay, apologies. This text is the Act as it existed prior to the 2003 amendment. So prior to 2003, the Act provided that the agency board must have 6 members who are government representative and 9 members who are representing the CSO sector. And it also empowered the minister to appoint the board chairperson at the first meeting of the board. It also prescribed the term of the board to be 3 years. And also to indicate that the members of the board are eligible for reappointment for 1 more term, but not exceeding 2 consecutive terms. Section 7 deals with the meetings and the quorum, indicating that the board must meet at least 4 times a year, which works out to be 1 meeting per quarter. Then there is a section dealing with the appointment of the CEO. The term of the CEO is fixed at 5 years, which is non-renewable, and the CEO is empowered to run the day-to-day affairs of the agency. The Act also prescribes that the CEO must enter into a performance contract which regulates the KPIs and how performance is going to be measured and so forth. Then the financing sections, basically the Act provides that the funds of the NDA consist of money appropriated from Parliament, donations contributed lawfully, interest earned on investment, and any other income derived from any other source. And then the Act directs how such funds should be utilized. and in a way, it provides that the funds should fund the operations of the agency. And also there are reporting requirements, but all of these sections have now been overtaken by the the PFMA, because we are now reporting in line with the PFMA, because it is the primary legislation that has been promulgated to regulate the financial affairs of all state institutions. Then came the 2003 amendment, which was to amend the NDA Act and to amend the definition of the minister, to reduce the number of board members, to further regulate the meetings of the board and empower the minister to appoint the chief executive officer and so forth. So on composition, that amendment then reduced the number of board members to 11, and the split to have 5 government representatives and 6 members representing the civil society organizations, which is the current composition, because it has never been amended since. the appointment of the chairperson is a discretion of the minister, who must appoint the chairperson at the first meeting of the board. Both the chairperson and the deputy chairperson, which was to amend the previous act and take the power away from the board. The quorum, because the number of the board members had been reduced, consequently, the quorum had also to change. It is now fixed at least 6 members, because you've got 11 members of the board. The appointment of the CEO, this section was amended to empower the minister to appoint on the recommendation of the board. And also because previously the appointing authority was the board. And also on the minister responsible used to be as indicated previously, used to be the Minister of Finance. This amendment transferred this responsibility to the Minister of Social Development. And also there were also amendments to section 10 and 11 regarding the submission of the annual reports. So now let me then move to the proposed amendments that we are currently processing through the Department of Social Development. In the main, these amendments also seeks to amend governance-related issues which have been identified as having some shortcomings and hampering the implementation of the act and the operation of the organization. So there aren't any mandate-related amendments that have been identified so far, but we are at the beginning of the process. Maybe as the process unfolds, there are a lot more amendments that will be proposed, but as things stand now, the current amendments are on the governance related matters. So also the amendments seeks to align or rationalize the NDA Act with the PFMA, as I indicated previously that the PFMA predated the Public Finance Management Act, and therefore there are matters that are regulated in the PFMA which ideally should reside in the PFMA. So we're trying to also rationalize those particular provisions. Or the bill also seeks to set out the functions of the board to have a clear delineation between operational matters and oversight, to also remove the requirement to have the chairperson appointed at the first meeting of the board, because this may be experience has taught us that it's always not practical to do this. It's easier to simply empower the minister to appoint the chairperson and not have a requirement that such should be done at the first meeting of the board. We also seek to provide for interim arrangements in the event the chairperson and the deputy chairperson are unable to fulfill their duties, because the current act is silent on that. So we always find practical challenges whenever the chairperson or both the chairperson and deputy chairperson are unable to fulfill their duties, which is not a desirable situation. The current act also does not provide for a mechanism for the minister to dissolve the board, because there may be instances which require for the minister to do so, and therefore this current amendment seeks to empower the minister to be able to dissolve the board should the need arise. On the term of the CEO, the current legislation provides for a non-renewable term of 5 years. The amendment seeks to make the term renewable, but which obviously won't be automatic. It will be at the discretion of the appointing authority. Probably there will be conditions about performance and so forth. But the feeling is that at least the appointing authority should have that room to be able to renew should a renewal be justifiable, because sometimes 5 years can be a short term to implement even the strategy of the organization. And lastly, or maybe the second to last point, is the one that I've already alluded to, which is to repeal the redundant provisions which are regulating matters which are already provided for in the PFMA. Also, when it comes to grant funding, the current legislation does not empower the board to delegate the power to grant funds, so that power resides with the board, and the legislation is explicit that such power cannot be delegated. And the amendment seeks to remove that restriction so that the board can have a discretion to, if they see fit, to also delegate that power to whoever, be it management or the CEO. Because you find a situation which is undesirable, wherein even application for grants which are as little as 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 has to go to the board and follow all the process up to the board, whereas maybe such amounts can be delegated to a lower levels of authority within the organization, so that you don't hamper efficiency through legislation. Also, the NDA Act does not have an explicit provision that empowers the board to establish committees, and we all know that it's easier for the board to carry out its functions if it operates through various committees which are processing all the issues that are going to the board, so that the board can come at a level of decision making and not really discussing brick and mortar issues. So that's what this amendment is also seeking to achieve. The current board does that. They have committees, but it's not sanctioned by any explicit provision of the Act, and we thought maybe it is prudent to to have a legislative provision which empowers the board to do so. And the last slide is just a synopsis of the process, so that maybe we can locate where exactly are we in the legislative development process. The bill has been drafted by the department because even us as the NDA, we are a stakeholder in this process. The process belongs to the department, who is a policymaker. They have accordingly drafted a bill, and currently the bill is undergoing internal consultative process between ourselves and the department and other internal stakeholders. Thereafter, it will be taken for certification by the State Law Advisor's Office before it goes to Cabinet for approval, which will then allow us to publish the bill for comments, which will be then an opportunity for all other external stakeholders, including the sector itself, to then make their comments, and we can also have consultative forums with the sector to get further inputs on the bill. After that, we will make necessary adjustments, amendments, and improvements informed by the comments. The bill will then go back to Cabinet for final approval, which will then allow for the tabling of the bill to Parliament. Then the parliamentary process will then unfold from then onwards, which also in it involves another consultative process, public participation. But at that stage, it will be outside of our hands. It will be driven entirely by Parliament. We will also partake in that process, being the stakeholder. So at this stage, I think we are at that second bullet point, wherein the bill is being developed internally and we are having consultative discussions between ourselves and the department and other internal stakeholders. Then after that, then the other external stakeholders will then be consulted on the bill itself. So maybe if I touch on some of the questions that were pointed questions that were raised in the program itself. One of which was how are the amendments going to affect the sector? At this stage, there aren't any amendments that are going to directly affect the sector. Because as I indicated, the current amendments are seeking just to improve on those governance shortcomings that are there in the bill. But maybe as the process unfolds, there could be substantive issues that will affect the sector directly. But for now, this is where we are. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shozi. I really appreciate that you made attempts to break down the proposed amendments. Where we're at now is that I'm going to hand over to Frank Meintjes, Dr. Frank Meintjes. There's also been a flurry of questions in the chat, but I'll leave that to Frank to facilitate. Just very briefly about Frank. Sorry, Frank, I have to do this. Frank is a writer and social development practitioner. He focuses on community organizations and development initiatives. He has written extensively on democracy, social justice, and the role of community organizations in development. And he began his career as a news reporter before moving into media work within trade unions. So Frank has more recently completed his doctoral studies And so we're privileged to have him here today. On the screen, you will see a Slido. I think Suzanne has put in the post. If you can pose your questions, everyone will then be able to see your questions. It will be easy for Frank then to go through this. So let me hand over to Frank to facilitate the next session. Thank you, Frank.
So thank you so much, Mr. Shozi, for that presentation. I'm just going to make one or two remarks and then I'll go to the questions. So the first is that I think it was really, really striking that you mentioned that these amendments do not really focus on mandate-related changes. The main focus is on governance-related changes. So that's the one. And then the second observation just to make is that maybe I hadn't been following well enough, but I picked up many of those administrative and governance changes, but I didn't hear you say much about any changes on objectives. So I'm just noting those. So the first three questions, if I can put it to you, Mr. Shozi, that comes out of the inputs from the participants are the following. The first is asking the question as to in what ways will the amendments improve the delivery of services that from the NDA to the sector? In what way will the amendments improve the delivery of services to the sector? And I think the rider to that is, again, given the resource problems, resource constraints, resource challenges in the sector, what difference will these amendments make to that? So that's the first question. The second question relates to the issue of fundraising. And I think your comment there that the NDA has never actually met that requirement of getting resources input from organizations abroad, from foreign governments and from foreign donors. And the question that comes from the participants in the meeting is, why hasn't the NDA been able to undertake fundraising in order to actually meet that requirement in the Act? And then the third question I'd like to put for now relates to this question of whether the NDA is a conduit as stated in the original Act or whether it's an implementing agency. And the way it came up in the chat as a question was that there's been a ballooning of staff. And that ballooning of staff suggests that, in fact, rather than being a conduit through which funding flows, it in fact is an agency with a huge infrastructure and institutional needs, and that then runs counter to the idea of being a conduit. So there are those three questions. In what way will services be improved? Why has funding not been undertaken by staff and board, fundraising? And the third is linked to the idea of the ballooning of staff, whether in fact the NDA has actually moved away from being a conduit towards being an implementer. Thank you.
Excuse me, Frank, before you proceed, I see a raised hand by Zine Tele. I have, according to the chat, it says the NDA board chairperson is on the platform using Zine. May I ask, Zine, is there a comment that wants? Yes, okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so just to welcome the chairperson, Dr. Ruth, if you want to make a comment. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Chairperson. Sorry for coming in late, but I want to remind everybody where the road that we have traveled in the discussions of the bill, and what I would have hoped that we would look at when we further engage. Last month, we had a workshop organized by the department. As it has been mentioned that the bill is driven by the department. In that workshop, we had Dr. Swongile Mkhabela, who was part of the team that spearheaded the establishment of the NDA, and also was part of crafting the founding act, the act that actually founded the NDA. She gave us a very good background of what was the thinking, what was the philosophical aspect, and how those that were charged with the responsibility of facilitating the establishment of the NDA about the NDA, including its location, which, if I may repeat, it was located in the presidency, and there were reasons, and there was a steering committee that was chaired by Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka at that time. And I thought that when we come to this session, particularly as the NDA, we would not just speak to what the bill says right now, but we would take a broader perspective, taking into account that in the workshop that I'm mentioning, we had been schooled. Even those that were not part of the process were schooled. We were reminded about the philosophical aspect of what the NDA was established to address, which is what Dr. Frank Matthews is actually raising. We were also schooled about how the NDA, how that locating the NDA in the presidency gave power for the NDA to be able to execute its mandate. And we are at a situation where there is outcry. Even the Treasury has been saying the NDA is making no impact in terms of the mandate. And Dr. Swongile pointed out that that happened as soon as the was moved from the presidency to fall under a Department of Social Development, as if the NDA is only addressing social issues, whereas the NDA was not established only to address social issues. It was established to address poverty and its causes. And the opportunity that we have today is that a DDM, and the DDM is also located in the presidency. Now, Frank speaks about the focus of this amendment, which is more about governance issues. It doesn't speak about the mandate. And the Treasury is saying, NDA, you have been away. And the Treasury was even saying, we want to close you down. And the NDA said, give us an opportunity, we have a turnaround strategy. But the elephant in the room is, why would the department propose a bill that only focuses on governance-related issues, which means it's internal looking. It doesn't look at how the NDA impacts on what the NDA was established to impact on. So I wanted us to get that clarity as to whether we want to continue in this trajectory and be put in a corner by the Department of Social Development to say, only focus on governance issues, and we don't look at how those governance issues are actually going to enable the NDA to address what the NDA was established to address. Comrade Frank, when I came to the NDA, I made a very nasty remark to say that I see the NDA as a SASA of the officials in the NDA, because my training background tells me that 80% of the budget should go to the mandate, addressing the mandate of what the institution was established to address. And only 20% of the budget should go to staff compensation and admin programs. If your project management approach gives 80% to staff compensation and admin and only 20% to address the mandate, that organization must actually realize that it doesn't exist to address the mandate, it only exists to provide employment to its staff. I said that when I assumed the chair of the NDA. And I think that the NDA, if it wants to survive, has to think out of the box and not allow itself to be controlled by the DSD that is only thinking about governance issues. The NDA should think about what the NDA exists for. And how does this bill that is proposed by DSD assist the NDA to continue existing and turn back and address what the NDA was established to address? So I thought that it is important for this session to actually look at that and say, are we continuing to discuss this bill in the form it is, or are we going back to the drawing board to then develop an appropriate bill that would position the NDA correctly and enable the NDA to address what it was established to address? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bengu. I really appreciate that input because it puts us, while all these questions that have been asked, much more in alignment with the kinds of ideas or thinking that you as board chairperson has. These were the kinds of questions people have had. And I'm also want to just underline the point you made, which I think is quite important, where you pointed to the shift from being an agency under the Treasury, under a central department, to one of the line departments, and how that then actually changed the kind of the focus and vision, and that problem mustn't again creep into these amendments. So colleagues, with that, I've noted all the questions and I will come to all of them. And I thought this might be a really, really good time to take the input of Mr. Rajesh Lachman, because it ties into exactly what Dr. Ruth Bengu has been saying, which is what is the current needs, pressures, demands, issues, challenges of the sector. What was the original intention of this vehicle called the NDA? And what are the ways in which really we want to go forward to re-establish a structure or an agency with strength, with effectiveness, with efficiency, that is able to meet our needs? So with your permission, I would like to go into that, so that because because that presentation speaks along the same lines. Thank you. So may I ask Mr. Rajesh Lachman to come in and give a complementary input, and then all things we've now changed our gaze, our view, to, on the basis of what Dr. Bengu has said, the chair of the NDA has said, to something at a much higher level than and including obviously the detail that we have been looking at so far. Mr. Lachman.
Thank you, Frank, and greetings, colleagues, comrades from the past, and those I haven't met yet. Yes, so my presentation is based around a few questions in this process. So I don't pretend to be able to know any answers or be able to give you answers about this, but to rather look at what are some of the thoughts that are going on around this process that may be complementary to it. And yeah, absolutely, the input by the NDA chair, Dr. Bengu, speaks directly to the thoughts that we have collaborated on before. So the first question that, on being invited to participate in this process was, wait, haven't we been here before? So while this process of amendments is new, the reality is that we have, over the years, there have been several initiatives to reinvigorate, strengthen, or even fix, if you want to use that word, the NDA, because it has a long history, some of which Dr. Bengu and others have alluded to already. And in its formation, it was seen.
Sorry, may I please correct that I am not the Ruth Bengu who is the doctor. I am Ruth Bengu, the community development practitioner. I used to work at Velgaspreid. There are actually 4 Bengus. I'm not the one who is Dr. Bengu.
Bengu, thank you for the clarification. So the NDA was envisioned as a flagship funding agency, not as a service provider. And this, again, Mambengu has pointed out as well in her presentation. So the first question is, wait, haven't we been here before? The second question follows on that. What have we done before when we have tried to revive, strengthen, or fix the NDA? And in this respect, these questions are directed to all of us participating here to think about, maybe make some notes, send your feedback through to Inyatelo, for example. As you're thinking about this, the third question would be, what has worked in previous attempts to realign, revive, or strengthen the NDA? The fourth question is, are we open to considering that process or the approaches that we are using to move the NDA in the right direction? And in this regard, I think Mambengu has already pointed out to us some of the glaring issues that she sees here, that we all see, especially the 80-20 split between operations and actual delivery, which is entirely inverted. And yes, it does look like sheltered employment for officials as opposed to be the National Development Agency of South Africa. And then another very important point Mambengu raised and Frank reiterated was the historic shift of the NDA from being part of the central structure of government to being part of a line department. And just listening to Ntate Shozi at the beginning, when he was talking through these amendments, something that particularly caught my attention was the amendment to change the appointment of the chairperson from a consensual process amongst the board to one that is overseen by the minister. And yeah, I don't think I need to elaborate much, but that tends to centralize power upwards towards a political appointee. It also suggests that the NDA as an entity in its current form is unable to undertake a very basic task of developing consensus around the chairperson. So this is troubling. It speaks, a bit to the centralization. It's a bit fascist leaning, and it would be grossly unhealthy. But that's just my opinion. It doesn't necessarily, lead that way. The fifth question is for you to think about and maybe give input on as people involved in the process, as people who are affected by the functioning, or in this case, the non-functioning of the National Development Agency, is what would the changes to the NDA look like for you? And in this regard, you can think about, maybe tell us what you think the NDA should be doing, how it should be doing it, where it should be doing it, for who it should be doing it. Where should this money for what it's doing come from? And who is it accountable to? Besides its legislative accountability, the national development, any national development agency around the world, like USAID, Oxfam Novus, Swedish International Development Agency, all have public-facing accountabilities that are not just to the parliamentary structures. So when you think about how you would like to, or what you vision as a functioning national development agency, include everything, not just what you want them to do or who you want them to fund, but how you want them to account for this. And then the last question, which, when I wrote it, I thought I was being a radical, having a very radical thought in my head, but Mambengu has confirmed that, no, my thought is not radical, it's already become generalized. And the last question I had was, is shutting down the NDA an option? And the fact that it is not a radical question anymore, but one that is actually being considered, tells us that the long history of the NDA has not been glorious. I mean, but yeah, we know that. And I like Mbengu's suggestion that this is arguably not the time to shut the NDA down. As Dr. Frank Menkes pointed out a few days ago, the withdrawal of funding by USAID is not the disaster that we think it is. If we can adjust our mindsets, we can see that the withdrawal of funding by USAID gives us an impetus to rethink and work harder around how we step in to fill this gap that has created. And the NDA, the way it was envisioned, the way it was referred to and drawn out in the RDP is exactly the agency that one would need to be able to fill that gap and go beyond it to meet our development priorities. And then the last point here is in your thinking about how the NDA can be its best version of itself. Just remind yourself of its original reason for being established. One, it was to eradicate poverty. And two, it was to eradicate the causes of that poverty. So when you're thinking about how you think the NDA can work better, keep in mind that by doing its work, it must eradicate, not ameliorate, not minimize, but it must end poverty in South Africa. I understand this is a very, it might seem like an impossible thing to achieve. But if we don't keep in mind that we are trying to achieve this impossible thing, we're going to end up doing what has happened over the last 20 some odd years of the NDA's functioning, which is that we are going to make piecemeal adjustments to something that is essentially broken. And I'm really grateful for Mbengu for pointing out that this is the time, not for us to step back from participating in a process as affected people and as ordinary South Africans even, to make the NDA the best version of itself that it can be. And this is not some government official's responsibility, it's not some legal advisor's responsibility, and it's certainly not the responsibility of a Minister of Social Development. It is the responsibility of civil society to ensure that we hold government accountable for fulfilling its mandate. And that mandate is, in respect to the NDA, to create an institution that will eradicate poverty and its root causes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Again, I think we are having an alignment between yourself and your input and that of the NDA chair, Comrade Ruth Bengu. And yes, Ruth, I did know that, but yeah, those were my notes to actually introduce you as doctor. So let's use our chat, and let's also open the chat now for this thing, for a discussion also on looking at what it is that we would like, what it is that, what are your ideas around shaping a kind of agency that is needed? And then we would fuse that back into the list of questions and criticisms that you have around the amendments. I just would like to make the remarks that, and repeat a bit about what Rajesh said, that this moment is a moment of great challenge, but it's also a moment of great opportunity. The second point I'd make is that there's a huge gap or hollow in terms of our national government's commitment to the sector. And that hollow has been worsened, exacerbated over time, but maybe it already started just after 1994. And that commitment arose after discussions with the pullout of external funders and people realizing that if we have a democracy and we want to have a viable and strong civil society sector, government has to take some responsibility for its resourcing. Not doing so obviously leads to all kinds of other problems that we see around the issues we have with the USAID. I think the last comment to make there is about that commitment is that you cannot have a national development plan and higher level objectives that encompass all sectors without making provision from government side for the resourcing of development actors that are operating in the civil society sector. So let's open the floor now for various comments from yourselves. In addition, while we're still continuing to collect questions and issues, and let's have more voices in the room,
Frank?
perspectives and views.
Frank, just to interrupt you, sorry, I think Siyabonga shows his hands up for a comment.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not really able to see that. I will try and enable that. Mr. Shozi, go ahead.
Demetrius, good morning, Board Chairperson. With your permission, Chair, may I make a suggestion which is informed by what I've heard so far? I think a lot of the questions that are arising and this forum can greatly benefit if we can engage the forum on the turnaround strategy process and what the turnaround strategy is trying to achieve and so forth, having a similar discussion, dedicating maybe a similar 2 hours to that discussion, because from what I hear, some of the questions can be answered if we can unpack that process. I'm not sure if the chair is of a similar view, but I think it can be of great benefit if we can have that discussion with the sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Shozi. So there's what Mr. Shozi appears to be referring to is that there's another process called the turnaround process. I'm not really aware of that. And then there's a process related to the amendments. So maybe if anyone can share with us about what that process is, that's aware of that process, the turnaround process of the NDA. Ferial or Mrs. Bengu?
Thank you very much. When the current board assumed office in the NDA, there was already a process. We came into office in January 2023. There was already a process which was undertaken by the NDA, responding to the reaction from both Treasury and the Portfolio Committee, as well as the Office of the Auditor General. They were all thinking that the NDA is not making any meaningful impact and therefore needs to be closed down. And the then minister wanted the NDA to be given an opportunity to develop a turnaround strategy. So that process started before we assumed office. We arrived at the tail end of the turnaround strategy. We didn't want to stop the process. We agreed that we approved the turnaround strategy with a condition that it's a working document that needs us to continuously look at, and also to ensure that the NDA goes back to the original mandate of working in partnership with the civil society organizations, but not just to be a grant funding organization, but in partnership with a special breed of civil society organizations who are focusing on poverty, on addressing issues of poverty, because the Department of Social Development is mandated to provide support to civil society organizations. So the NDA can then duplicate what the Department of Social Development is mandated to do. But the NDA can work with civil society organizations who are specifically addressing what the NDA is mandated to address. So we agreed and approved the turnaround strategy, rather than saying, let us start all afresh and look at what was the original mandate of the NDA. Is the NDA correctly located if it is under the Department of Social Development? What made the NDA to become weak when it was established? It wasn't a weak organization. So the turnaround strategy gives an opportunity for the civil society. We even had a workshop where we invited some of the civil society organizations to actually assist in the turnaround strategy, to assist the NDA to develop a 5-year strategic plan that would also have input from civil society organizations to ensure that what we are actually doing as the NDA is informed by civil society organizations who are working in the space of poverty, dealing with poverty, because that is the mandate of the NDA. But another mandate of the NDA is to mobilize resources and build capacity of civil society organizations. Now, when one look at the NDA today, the NDA does not even have the kind of power and capacity that was yielded by Welgespreid Fellowship Center, which I worked for. Many of the people that are working in civil society organizations were actually trained by the Welgespreid Fellowship Center, and some of those people were also sent out of the country by the Welgespreid Fellowship Center to get experience and get exposure on how other countries have dealt with the situations that South Africa was finding itself in. So I worked in Welgespreid. I didn't have all the knowledge that I have. I was sent by Welgespreid to Coady International Institute of St. Francis Xavier University. I was sent to Mondragon the NDA doesn't play that role in building the capacity of civil society organizations so that we can have a civil society development practitioners who are capacitated. The capacity that the NDA describes for civil society organization is training on compliance, training on those things, and then providing them with a small amounts of money, which does not have impact. My last input is, how does the SD help the NDA to achieve its mandate? I just want to make one example. If in what we are exposed to and see happening in other countries, if Vietnam made an impact on poverty by having a policy as a country to provide 5 hectares of land to poor families, what role is played by the DSD to then help the NDA work with ensure that the civil society organizations are developing people that have access to land, when we know that one of the key strategies that were used to create poverty was to take land away from the people who are poor today. So the turnaround strategy, yes, it is there, but it needs to be beefed up. And it cannot be beefed up only by the NDA people. It can be beefed up by having more of these discussions where the development practitioners and people who are in the civil society organizations are able to speak up, because there are many people who have a capacity, but they were marginalized. And then new grant-driven NPOs mushroomed. So that is another elephant in the room, that the NDA is providing capacity and grant funding to people and organizations that were not necessarily there to establish the NDA. All those that were there and gave back to the NDA have been marginalized, overlooked. The NDA only interacted with me when I became the chairperson of the NDA. They didn't have any interaction with me, but I am running an organization. I established the Institute for Cooperatives and Community Economic Development. My organization has developed a model that has been adopted by the Department of Higher Education and Training, and we have been given funding. I don't need funding from the NDA, but I am a civil society that can partner with the NDA to go to to communities that are affected by poverty, which is the target group of the NDA. So that is what we need to discuss here, and not mince words. You are muted.
Frank, if you're there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, I am.
Glenn
Thanks
has
so
his
much.
hand up, please, Frank.
Yes. So Glenn, I'll recognize you now. So thanks, Ms. Bengu. So I think what that raises, your input, is how can we change our focus towards this turnaround strategy process? What forum or platform can be created for civil society organizations really to engage with that process and to use it for those dynamic outcomes which you talk about as the NDA chair? And if you look at Mashila's comments in the chat there, he starts to signal that. I think it was one of the second to last comments. Over to you, Glenn. Apologies, I didn't see your hand.
No, Frank, could we have Jimmy and others? I'll come in a bit.
So I'm trying to look at the my list of hands here, and I think maybe Suzanne, if you can help me, because sometimes with the screen one can't always see what hands are up. There's a lot happening here. So which are the three hands that are up there, Glenn? The first three?
The first, there's just one hand, Jimmy Gotiana.
And the next one?
There's no other hands at the moment.
Okay. Over to you, Jimmy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Comrade Frank. It's so wonderful, colleagues, that we are meeting as at this juncture in our country. On this platform, I see the doyen of activists, Comrade Frank, Rajesh. I've not seen you, Rajesh, for a while. Comrade Glenn, and various other comrades, colleagues like Colleen Dutoit, Mamuno Zabelo, my leader. I'm mentioning these people, Comrade Frank, because of the role that they've played in the past in shaping NDA to where it is now. NDA, as Mamu Pengu was saying, it is coming from a strong-rooted activism, because we felt at that time that we need a vehicle that will spearhead all the issues that we want them to be addressed in our country. And beside that, we wanted to make sure that that vehicle will be a necessary tool of ensuring that, they augment what government's intention were from that time up until today. We must say it frankly, in bold terms, that for 30 years, comrades, colleagues, NDA has failed the space, the NPO, comrades, colleagues. I'm saying this because all what its intention were that of ensuring that they address the issue of poverty, the causal effects to poverty. Up until today, nothing has been done. Now, if you go back to the NDA Act of 1998, especially on the object of the NDA, Section 3, the primary objective there talks about granting funds to civil society organizations. But Comrade Frank, I think there's a question that needs to be clarified here, from the onset. If we say that it should grant funds to civil society organizations, now, because the trend that I will see is that now NDA is funding cooperatives, is funding social enterprises. Now, these bodies or these sectors that I've mentioned, these two, do they constitute a core to civil society strata? And I think it's something that needs to be addressed, Chair, because some people might misconstrue the granting of funding to unmandated sectors, because the act is clear that civil society organization. But I think for the past 5 years or even more, we've seen a lot of cooperatives, a lot of social enterprises, being, at the center of receiving the resources from NTA. And I'm saying this because it's something that needs to be addressed. from the word go. The other point, Chair, it relates to the 80-20 allocation, budget allocation. Because you'll find that 80% of the budget from NDA is being spent to cover for staff and offices. And a mere low 20% will be retained to ensure that they support, the sector, so to speak, civil society. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed, I hear Comrade Shezi is talking about the turnaround strategy. In our understanding, turnaround strategy is an internal instrument devised by the board to ensure that how do they ensure that they make things seamless in terms of operation, in terms of fulfilling their mandate. But I think it's something that needs to be looked at because I think today we are called to attend this, amendment bill workshop so that we could critique, so that we could solicit input as well, so that by the 28th of February, we might be able. So I think the question therefore is, now that Mama Nozabelo, you are saying that these issues must be put on hold, because I think you are right to say that they look at the governance issues, because I think what is our main source of inspiration, of concern, is whether NDA mandate is being, realized. And I think our duty is to ensure that we always make sure, the issue of being the conduit is something that we cannot continue with it. The issue of resource mobilization, looking at international and external donors, is something that need to be looked at, So I think these are some of the elements which I think are very, very important so that we could look into how this organization would work. But I'm glad that the chairperson is here, because I was worried, because I thought that we are called to this session by NPO working group and Farrell, thank you for bringing us together. But I felt that NDA is not here, but they expect us to, to present something with the 28. We're not being taken seriously. So I'm happy that now the chairperson is here. And I think some people, Gerald and Tembu, are here, people that have played a big role in making sure that we do things the right way. So all I'm trying to say, Chair, we need to look at the mandate of the NDA. We need to ensure that we address the issue of the strengthening of the institutional capacity of the sector, and we must address this issue of society, whether cooperatives, whether social enterprises, they belong to us, or what is it, so that you are clear on this here. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for that. And I think there's probably a lot of alignment between some of the things which are coming out in the chat from people. The one thing just to underline before I pass on to the other questioners, people who want to speak, is the point that Jim is making, which is that there is this talk in some of the drafts about a focus on the entrepreneurial area of civil society organizations. And there's also that emphasis in a lot of the work of the NDA, the focus on projects. And I think even the chair talked about this whole idea of grant-driven CBOs, which were then set up. And the point Jim is making is that the original act and the original commitment in the democratic transition, and in fact the commitment in the Constitution, is towards the enabling and the resourcing of the whole of civil society. And that is the issue that's being brought back on the agenda. So I want to recognize now Vanessa, and then also following on straight from that is Mashile to speak. And then I also got an indication, I also want to recognize Cynthia to speak. So those three will follow now. Thank you.
Sorry, Frank, there's also Ken Sani.
Oh, sorry, I
Glenn,
didn't
all
pick
right?
that up. Yeah.
Okay, so you've got four. You have four.
Yeah, so-
Glenn,
yes.
Vanessa, Kinsani, sorry.
So Vanessa, I've recognized you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I think it's fantastic that Inyatelo is facilitating communication between organizations like the
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Vanessa. Perhaps if you could go closer to your speaker because we cannot hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you slightly better. I'm not sure about others.
Can you hear me now?
Much better.
Okay, I just wanted to say firstly thank you to Inyatelo for facilitating this, because I think it's so important for organizations like the NDA to be accessible to smaller grassroots organizations that are working on the ground. I'd like to add to the previous speaker by saying that I think that we also I'd like to see more pragmatic, very specific deliverables. For example, things like it's almost like the NDA and like another example would be, say, the IDC, are not accessible to grassroots organizations, particularly in rural areas. It all filters down through other NGOs. And I also feel that organizations are working in silos. So, for example, the EPWP programs and the CWP programs, and also the programs that the IDC rolls out. How does the NDA have any oversight over those? You know, so what are the connections? Are they working with other other departments? So I just think that there should be practical things, and also at a municipal level, like the NDA should be holding municipalities accountable. If you look at our municipality, they spend nothing on social development, nothing, absolutely nothing. They've got resources like community spaces that are sitting unused for 4 years because tenders don't go through. So what I'm trying to get to is that in the amendment of the bill, that there also be very specific places where the NDA can mobilize resources and funds. And the last example I want to give is another thing that is very popular in our municipality are special ratings areas in the more privileged communities. Now, part of that's all being used for security, but in the bill, it could specify that all SRAs have to contribute whatever, a particular percentage of their income to community development, and that the NDA should somehow be able to use possibly an organization like Unmute to monitor and ensure that those kinds of things happen at a very local level. Thank you. I hope I've made myself clear.
Great, thank you. Thanks for those suggestions, and they will be taken up also in the collation from this meeting. Thanks so much, Vanessa. Next is, I'm now looking at hands, but I said that Mashile wanted to come in, but I see Mashile, are you there then, Cynthia?
Yeah, thanks. I'm audible, Frank.
Yes, you are.
Thanks. Yes. I think let's not really dwell on the blaming game of NDA. We know that NDA has failed us, but let's come with a very robust proposals to say what we must do from here. I think now we are more organized than the previous years. So I think now let's come with saying the first intervention I will propose, that one of my colleague from NDA, to say, let's have a very serious, robust strategic plan to change the narrative of NDA, especially those, to look at those objectives. I think my colleague Ruth and other people have spoken, but more important is that I think we are in the question is that we also as civil society, we need to blame ourselves we were more marginalized, we never been organized, and we need to be blamed ourselves. And then the loss of leadership there, we need to blame ourselves too. But the more important is that I think let's come with the strategic input to say, let's start, can NDA or all the partners, can we put something together to do a very thorough strategic plan, including the Mebengu there, so that we can come together, all the CAD, all the practitioners come together, especially those who have experience, come together and come with that plan. And then from there is where now we can engage to go to the presidency to say, or to go to the cabinet to say, this is the changes which we want to make in the NDA bill. This is the way that we can develop that. Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks.
Yes. So thanks for that, Mashile. So we're talking here about the idea of what is that forum, that platform, that space to actually engage with that turnaround. And then I think what Mashile is adding into that is that from that turnaround, we have some kind of strategic thinking and thought which actually looks at those objectives. Cynthia, over to you. Cynthia is the chairperson of the Civil Society Unmuted Coalition. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, for that opportunity. I think as Civil Society Unmuted, we really heeded the call of why civil society is not able to address some of the challenges that the country was facing, including the challenges that were faced by NDA, because we're a fragmented civil society fighting for limited funding and causing us to work in a fragmented way. And today, as Unmute, we are saying that we are committed to uniting and amplifying the voices of civil society organizations across South Africa. And we also aim to foster collaborations and advocate for for a better cohesive civil society. I would like to welcome the initiative by Inyathelo. Although we are coming at the end tail of this process because we were not part of the previous engagement on this process. I would have loved to have an opportunity to consult broadly, especially with our members in the district level, who continued to be raising issues around, accountability, lack of accountability and transparency, and that the NDA had not fulfilled its mandate. So it could have been, I think, proper for us to go back and be able to engage them on this bill because it's going to impact on our work as civil society organizations. Yeah, the deadline of submission was a concern to me that there hasn't been sufficient consultations, and yet we have been given up to the 28th to make a submission, which is why it causes this continued lack of a delivery of some of these some of these actions that we come out of these kind of processes because of they are always rushed. And the people continue to be marginalized. Civil society will continue to be marginalized, through this kind of approach of always creating limited space for us to be able to engage on issues that are going to impact on civil society. Yes, I was also concerned when I looked at section 3.1a on the primary object of NDA. But looking at the second one, carrying out economic development, job creation and revenue generation projects or programs in poor communities. And I'm glad that my colleague Jimmy did raise that sharply, because my concern was that now, where do we locate social enterprises and cooperatives? Because the minute you bring in, job creation and revenue generation organizations, you are referring to your cooperatives and your social entrepreneurs. And we know that in terms of the regulation of these two structures, they are regulated under the Companies Act. So I've been trying to locate this. So I think we need to really look at, having a discussion around this particular, amendment, because it's going to have, it's going to impact, and also it's going to continue to, to contribute to NDA not being able to fulfill its original mandate. So I would really want us to also support that we need to create further engagements through a forum that is going to look at the turnaround strategy of NDA if we were to assist us to become this original version of itself. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. And I also hear that appeal about the deadlines that we sometimes work with the sector. But there's a willingness to work together with this process and to co-create. Over to you. I know Mkinsani Gerald Mtembu also has a lot of experience of some of these institutions as well. So please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, Comrade Frank. It's good to see you, as well as other colleagues on the platform, and also to Ferial and Chairperson and other colleagues. Thank you very much. I think the discussion has moved on since I raised my hand, so I wouldn't want to take us back, because I think the discussion is starting to look at way forward in terms of what can be done moving forward. Just to make just one point, that the other thing that we must take into account is that the NDA funding model is skewed itself, because really the allocation to the NDA in the past 10 years has not increased, which leads to whereas to be able to truly address or fulfill its mandate. So the allocation has not increased. So there's that issue in terms of whether the funding model of the NDA is a correct one in order to carry its mandate and to do its work. And whereas the cost of running the organization, just the basic costs besides salaries, keeps on increasing. So it's something that as civil society needs to be challenged in terms of saying, how do we ensure that the funding model of the NDA is correct? What kind of funding model are we looking at in order to make the NDA sustainable and for it to fulfill its mandate? But otherwise, I think I'm aligned to the discussion and the proposals that are coming out. I think it's something that we welcome, I think, as those that are currently in the NDA. So thank you very much, colleagues, for the engagement, the robust engagement that we are having today. But we need to look at all those factors, including its funding model, including even its placement, even within the Department of Social Development, which was not the original idea of where the NDA should be positioned when it was first envisaged. So I think those are the kinds of things that we need to engage in as civil society. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much. So we now are looking towards the final stretch of the meeting, turning the corner towards a finishing line. So we've got Boiswa, we've also got the NDA chairperson, Ruth Bengu, and we've got Siyabonga Shozi, who did the presentation from the NDA. Those three in a line, but I also saw Glenn's hand, and I also will give you an opportunity, Glenn. So let's take it in that order. Boiswa, over to you.
Good day, colleagues and comrades. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm Vuyiswa, coming from the civil society organization, Langa Community Action Network. We are one of those organizations that mushroomed, I like this word that has been used here, mushroom, during the COVID-19 lockdown, where the plight of poverty was really naked in our country and in our society. We started with small community kitchens around, and we started with mobilizing some funds to the affluent areas to assist the township in our rural areas in terms of beating the hunger because there was lots of unemployment that was happening around. Through that program, we actually developed, through that session, developed a program of looking at those who were actually unemployed, on drugs, depressions and stuff. As of today, we are actually running, I think, one of the few in the Western Cape, the child care center. We are actually looking for those children who are actually vulnerable, neglected, and we're actually having nothing from the government that is being supported by, except for the private sector. However, where I'm coming from, I'm very glad of wrestling this bill and talking about it, because I'm going to be talking to something that has already been said by others, because I'm almost the last in the speaking session. One is silence of the departments. If we can look at the mandate of the DSD with the NDA and relook at it, have the DSD strengthen its support to the NDA. However, if there is something that speaks to poverty alleviation within the NDA, and that poverty alleviation that has been mentioned by one of the speakers, it has to do with arresting certain families or society or certain communities in terms of land accessibility. How is NDA or DSD going to be talking to the sister department with agriculture or rural development to ensure that they actually deliver to that? Because that is where the problem is. Secondly is, lots of these departments, they've got funds or grants that have to do with a social alleviating such and social ills and stuff. Why shouldn't they be mobilized and be centralized in one area, maybe being actually channeled through the NDAs? Because some of them, you find that by the NDA of their financial year, they've done nothing to those grants and to those funds that were available there. That is my advice. And I think that nothing really is actually bad, but what we've actually had today is the part of the shared 80-20% of the budget or of the funds that are within the department. Surely we cannot have all the funds or the budget of the department going towards staff salaries and so, without actually saving its mandates, without saving its service that is supposed to do the service delivery to the people that is supposed to do so. So that needs to be restructured, that needs to be corrected, that needs to be done well. I'm still not yet sure that it should be actually moved from the Department of Social Development. Instead, more strengthening of the agency itself so that it can work like other agencies they do. It's so lull. The only thing that you will hear about the NDA is only when you realize that they have actually they've actually realized that they didn't use funds to their optimal level. And you hear that there's just one civil society organization that has been awarded 200 million, while others have got none. So those are the things that we are watching, we are saying, Homer, all the work that we do here is been targeted to one entity. So those are the things that need to be stopped. But monitoring and evaluation is key. It has to be very strong, because if MNE was very strong, those things that we are all mentioning here, they could have been picked up. They could have been something that is being done about them. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chairperson,
Yes.
with your indulgence, may I come before you so that you have the final word, Chair?
I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Okay,
Okay.
that's okay with you.
No, mine is it's a quick one, Mr. Frank. I just wanted to allay fears of some of the members that they may not have an opportunity to make inputs further. The process is right at the beginning, and the department is still going to publish this bill for public comments, which will give every interested party and stakeholder an opportunity to comment. So, Ms. Cynthia will still have an opportunity to consult with your stakeholders and make further inputs. Thank you very much.
Yes, good point from you there, that this process will have certain steps in it, at least that's the legislative process. And we will be communicating that to everyone, the different phases of it and where you can make input. Over to you, NDA Chair Ruth Bengu.
Thank you very much. I want to respond first to what Siyabonga Shozi is saying, that yes, it is at the initial stage. But what would become important is whether this bill is actually needed, or we would be wasting time by processing a bill that does not talk to what affects people out there, which the NDA was established to do. Because from where I sit, I don't know how all the governance issues that are addressed in the bill would enable the NDA to become an effective organization to execute its mandate. I want to make an example. I was a chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Sport and Recreation. There was a bill proposed on dog racing. It was consulted, but when it arrived on my desk, I saw it as a useless bill. And I advised my organization that we need not to waste time and discuss this bill. And the bill was struck off, and we did not process that bill. So when a country is faced with high levels of poverty, and instead of discussing, coming up with a bill that would enable the NDA to contribute in poverty eradication and contribute positively and impactfully, why should we be wasting our time to discuss a bill that has got nothing to do with the mandate of the NDA, but has more to do with compliance and powers of the ministers, powers of the board, how many years a CEO has to serve? That thing doesn't even need a bill. Doesn't need a bill. What a bill that is needed when we look at what is happening in the country is a bill that would enable the NDA to play its role effectively and efficiently within a short space of time. So that's the input that I want to make, to say that I don't want to waste time when there are better things to do. The second issue that is in relation to the bill, this bill, I see it as a useless bill. I'm sorry to say that, being the chairperson of the board, but I also have a freedom of speech like any other person in the country. The bill is a useless bill. It doesn't assist, it will not assist the NDA to impact meaningfully on its mandate. But I also want to go back to the issue raised about the cooperatives. I am a fundi in cooperatives. I actually specialized on that. And the concept of cooperatives is part of community economic development. Now, if civil society organizations would question the cooperatives' involvement in poverty eradication, it would mean that we need to to speed up the process of establishing the National Cooperatives Academy as provided by Act number 14 of 2005, which was amended in 2013, which is yet to be established. 20 years later, the Act was passed in 2005. We are in 2025. The National Cooperatives Academy was not established, and if it was established, we would have a better understanding of what animal is a cooperative. Now, let me share my knowledge. I would want to start by saying we should not make a mistake of looking at cooperatives in the same way that the current government has done, to adopt a narrow perspective of what is a cooperative and think that cooperatives are small businesses. Cooperatives are not small businesses. Cooperatives, if well understood in a broader perspective, are an effective instrument used to build sustainable communities who do not perpetually depend on government handouts for survival. Real cooperatives establish community or workers-owned enterprises that provide services or goods to members and also facilitate development at community level, because profits or surplus made by cooperatives is not used in the same manner that profit is used by businesses who do not subscribe to the principles of cooperatives. The surplus is used to address social ills affecting communities. So the concept of cooperatives is actually an instrument that can be used by civil societies to build sustainable communities. I want to make an example. Section 21 of the South African Schools Act, Act number 84 of 1996, provides for school governing bodies to take decisions on how money invested by government can be used. But to this date, there is no, the tender for stationery, for textbooks, for all the things that are used in the schools are actually controlled by HODs and by the departments, not the school governing bodies, taking away this power that this act, which was passed in 1996, gives to the school governing bodies. Now, if that act is read together with Act number 14 of 2005, which provides for the establishment of a primary cooperative by 5 natural persons or 2 juristic persons. I now want to come to the juristic person. 2 schools in a ward, establishing a cooperative to have an enterprise that is producing the stationery. The stationery is a paper with lines where a learner writes. The machines are worth 30,000 and some which are cheaper, and there are others that are expensive. And then the school would recruit unemployed youth in the community to be part of this cooperative. That is job creation, that is poverty reduction. And the school would provide itself with the service of stationery. So the money that is plowed by government and invested in these 2 schools in a ward remains in this community because the school has a cooperative that is producing the stationery, and members of the cooperative are also the unemployed youth in the community. So that school is self-reliant, that school is self-sufficient. And then the profits, because they are made by a cooperative enterprise owned by the two schools, would be used to upgrade the toilets where children have drowned. During this government, children have drowned in toilets because the schools are waiting for government to come and build the toilets, because the concept of cooperatives is misunderstood from 1994. It's misconstrued and it is implemented incorrectly. So the point that I'm making is that it is not incorrect for the NDA, which is mandated to contribute to the eradication of poverty, to identify cooperatives as one instrument that can be used to actually address that problem in communities and build sustainable communities. Because when you eradicate poverty, or you contribute to the eradication of poverty, you are building sustainable communities. And sustainable communities cannot be built without having enterprises and money circulating in those communities. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks. So I'm pleased that you made that input there, Ms. Bengu, because I wanted to come in on that question as well. But I think you have brought out that we should really keep the unity of all the organizations that work out of the community to address issues facing the community. And if one looks at asset-based community development, if one looks at, for example, the history of other community development processes in places like India, in kind of the work that was undertaken by Nyerere, the community working together in income generating projects has always been there. There are some cooperatives in the private sector, like the cooperatives of the wine owners and so on. But there is a long history of people working together and using income generating projects and programs. So it's part of that whole inclusiveness. And I think the one point I was making earlier was that the one thing coming out of the NDA Act was talking much more about a kind of a strong exclusive focus on that. I want to do a wrapping up of some of the points that have come out, and I want to acknowledge that Glenn still needs to speak and then do that wrapping up. But just to underline the last point that it seems to be coming through about whether we should keep our focus on this idea of legislative changes, amendments to this act, and whether we should rather really be focusing on that other change process from which could come, out of which could come a strategic plan, like Mashile has said, which could then inform legislative changes if we needed it. But what Ruth Bengu is saying is that we might not even need that. We might be able to actually achieve the objectives we can with actually a different strategic approach and a different political will using the current structure. But we can look at that. So we'll come back to that. Glenn, can I give you a moment on the platform?
Thanks, Frank, and thanks to Inyatelo and all our colleagues who have contributed. I think really we've had a strong sense of the importance of the moment, not only the historical evolution, but also the current challenges. So I want to appreciate both the chair of the NDA as well as all of the staff and all of us for contributing to this conversation. As a point of departure, Frank, I would like to suggest, now I'm going to be out of order, so but I think it might help us to have a dual focus. Firstly, to recognize that there is a formal process with its own deadlines, and I know that we've already said that some of those have have been very, very tight, as always, when it comes to these processes. And the other is the question of the broader strategic turnaround of the NDA. So if I may, taking enormous liberties here, I'd like to ask if Cynthia, Jimmy, and I think Kagiso Trust are on the call. I'm going to ask those colleagues if they are happy with some support from the NPO working group to constitute a smaller liaison committee which can help coordinate the pulling together of submissions, the dissemination of information further, and contributions from the sector. And then to also begin to conceptualize the process and liaise with DSD and the NDA on strategic orientation and critical questions. So I'm asking, Frank, as we close, can we have that as a concrete take-home? Because I think all of us recognize the importance of the issues raised here, but if we leave it as just a vague process, rather if we can ask our leadership here to be happy if they could agree to become a small group that can take this work further for us. So I think
stay on.
Yeah.
Then just stay on the floor, and I want to just ask those three while you're still on the floor to indicate in the chat whether you're saying yes. That's Cynthia, Jimmy, and then the person from Kagiso Trust. Carry on, Glenn.
No,
can we just see that?
Yeah,
can we
it's
see that
it's
indication?
Nonkululeko, Cynthia, Jimmy.
Yeah, can you just give us that indication by saying yes or not sure or whatever? Cynthia says yes. Jimmy?
I've commented, Comrade Frank, yes.
Okay, yes. Yeah. Great. So we have that. And from Kagiso Trust, yes, we have that. And then we also know that we have some broader input and coordination coming from the NPO group as well. So because of time, colleagues, I really just want to give you all sort of a vote of thanks for your deep thinking about this issue, your passion for the sector, and also some of the innovative ideas you've come up with also at the detail level. You've really given us all a kind of a clear way forward. I also want to thank the representatives from the NDA for your own inputs and the way you've openly shared. I think both, Mr. Shoza, the technical inputs you've given, but your strategic outlook and vision from your side, NDA Chair Ruth Bengu, and then again in your teller for the hosting. And I think just by way of like pulling the threads together is to say that really a whole wide range of questions were raised about the amendments that are being put forward, and fundamentally whether those amendments which have been said were governance focused would in fact make a difference, bring the NDA back to its original mission, and begin to address all the resource requirements of the civil society sector at this time. And I think there was consensus that those amendments are quite inadequate for that. There were then a whole number of really good suggestions coming through about what a different agency would look like and how it would function. And one of those that have come through is how about looking at that idea of this 80-20 split, where 80 is used more on the institutional development and institutional strength rather than the flow through to civil society. How about reversing that so that in fact the bulk of the resources flow through to civil society in line with the Act? So that's just one, but there were many. And then lastly, just to say we now have introduced into this meeting, in addition to this track, there's some discussion about a piece of legislation that's being amended. We've introduced the second track, which says this is a more important or as important a track that we should be moving along, which is about really a co-creation of something new, something more dynamic, something much more in line with the idea of resourcing civil society so it can be in partnership to the development vision, to the national development plan, so it can be much more well-resourced. And I think within that, also to look at the ways in which something like that kind of NDA can also play a role in dealing with the fragmentation on the government side and bringing in resources. So we've got those two tracks, and we've got a kind of a coordination here. And so we do have a way forward. And so with those remarks, then I would like to hand back over to Ferial. And again, just to thank again all the participants. You came to the meeting, you brought your energy, you overcame any skepticism you had, and you again demonstrated that commitment to the sector. Over to you, Ferial.
Thank you, Frank. I mean, you said it all. There isn't really anything for me to say. I must thank you for coming to the party at very short notice, and we pulled this together with a small team. But yeah, thanks to all of those people who actually committed to be part of that. I want to maybe also say on behalf of the organizing committee is thank you very much to Ms. Bengu, to Mr. Shozi, to the speakers, Rajesh, and also Glenn, who was part of the organizing committee. As always, great input from everyone. I think they will be following on this an email with some information. Next steps will probably be outlined. We probably need to have an internal just to see how we're going to deal with the next steps. As you all know, bringing all of these things together does require a lot of effort, coordination. And at the moment, everyone is here because they want to be here. So everything and every bit of time is on a voluntary basis at this point in time. So thank you for showing up and actually sacrificing almost 2.5 hours of your time. But I want to leave you with this because it stuck with me. Kensani commented earlier on. He said that when Frank gave him a chance to talk, he said, the discussion has moved on since I raised my hand. And while he was talking, I thought about the sector. Our hand has been up for how long? So we've always got our hand up. And yet we wait and we wait. And then eventually we do what we do today. We mobilize each other and we get together and we talk about the issue. So that for me was just so profound, Kensai. Thank you for bringing that up. I want to thank you. Have a great weekend. Again, yeah, have a great weekend. There's lots to do. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, comrades. Bye, colleagues. Bye, Frankie.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Hi, bye-bye, all. Thanks.
Your contact details.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much for the session.
Okay.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Maybe we should have sang Shoshiloza.
Thank you, Feria.
Hey, Salman.
Good seeing you.
Yes.
Thanks, Ruth.
Notes on emails.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Frank.
Yes.
Bye, Phil.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ruth.
Yes,
Bye.
bye.
Let's talk after this.
Yes.
And if you turn off the recording, Jacques, then maybe we can stay on this call for the debrief. Frank and Glenn, are you still here?